So we were talking, we were at the beginning of the 8th chapter of Shekalim. This is the last chapter. And we're looking at lost objects and at things that go wrong, things are found. And we began the chapter yesterday with spit, which is found in Jerusalem, which seems like a kind of a weird subject for the Mishnah to discuss. But that's the first Mishnah. And then the Mishnah goes on to talk about Kalim, about vessels. So you can see the Mishnah is almost segueing into material which is more connected to the Beit Mikdash. And the language is the same, by the way. So the first Mishnah, Kol hayarukin hanimtzaim b'Yerushalayim, all the spit which is found in Jerusalem. And the second Mishnah, our Mishnah tonight, goes Kol hakelim hanimtzaim b'Yerushalayim. And then the next Mishnah will go on Sakin hanimtzeit ba'arba'asa. So the vessels, kol hakelim hanimtzaim b'Yerushalayim, all the vessels which are found in Jerusalem. Derech Yerida Leveit HaTfilah Tme'in. If we find them going down to the place of immersion, they're impure. Derech Aliyah T'horin. If we find them on the way up, they're pure. Shelo Ke Yeridatan Aliyatan. Because the going down isn't the same as the going up. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir seems to have an idea that there are two paths. It's a bit like a one-way system. We're going to go down to the place of immersion, probably because we want to go down to where there's running water. Anyone who's been to see the city of David knows actually that the running water is down below. So, and the hills are pretty steep actually, so it's not surprising if we go to Rabbi Meir's assumption that they had two separate paths. One path leading down, and if someone dropped a vessel there, we assume it's tameh, and then one path leading up, so that if a vessel is found leading up, on the path leading up, then we know it's tahor. And the Rambam has another view that somehow people could tell from the way they were holding the vessel whether it was pure or not. I just don't. I don't quite get that, but the geographical issue, particularly thinking through the context of the steep slopes down to the water in Jerusalem, I can understand the geographical concept, and that's the easiest way of understanding Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kulan Tahorin. He says they are all pure. He's got this assumption that any vessel found in Jerusalem is pure. So his assumption is that there's some wonderful social cohesion in Jerusalem, and people keep their vessels clean. If you find a vessel in Jerusalem, you assume it's tahor. And the only exceptions he makes are vessels which are specifically dedicated to work in graveyards. Kulan torin chutz min hasal ve'amagrefa ve'hamaritza, the basket and the rake and the pick, which are specially used for graves. So in other words, if this utensil is not specially dedicated to graves, you can assume in Jerusalem that it's tahor, and that means, of course, you can use it. What about a knife? Sakin shenimtzeit, and this is a knife which is found, but this is found in Jerusalem. So the context is in Jerusalem, even though we don't say Sakin Shenimtzeit B'Yerushalayim. Sakin Shenimtzeit, this knife which is found, Ba'arba'asre, Ba'arba'asar, it's found on the 14th. This is the 14th of Nisan, of course. It's the time when, of course, everyone is bringing their animals and their knives. If the 14th falls on Shabbat, they shove the knife into the fur of the animals to carry it on Shabbat to the temple. Jerusalem is just full of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. You can imagine the amount of lost property there is in Jerusalem on the 14th. And halacha is, if you find a knife on the 14th, shochet ba miyad, you can use it immediately. So the assumption is that someone who's bringing a knife to Jerusalem on the 14th has brought it in a state of taharas, brought it in a state of purity. Bishlosha asar, shonel makbil, on the 13th, we must immerse it again. Maybe again, because, well, maybe the owner immersed it once, but maybe he was bringing it to immerse it. We don't know, and we're careful. Vekofitz, and a cleaver. This is a massive sort of meat axe. A kofitz is sort of some kind of meat axe, which we use for breaking bones. It's not used for slaughtering. It's not used for slaughtering. A cleaver is not used for slaughtering, whether it's found on the 13th or the 14th, we immerse it. What if the 14th falls on Shabbat? Shabbat. So the 14th falls on Shabbat. We can slaughter with it immediately. The Rambam here, by the way, says that we're talking about a knife, not a kofitz, not a cleaver. Although the commentators differ here. It's much easier to understand. Well, we can debate what the best way of understanding this Mishnah is. If the 14th falls on Shabbat, then we can slaughter immediately. If we follow the Rambam, that's a repetition of the previous Mishnah. And on the 15th, we slaughter with it immediately. Because by the 15th, we assume that the knives have been toveled. We assume they've been immersed. There's no need to, there's not only any need to immerse the knife again, but there's no possibility of carrying out the tahara on Yom Tov. So the 15th is already Yom Tov, and we're not going to immerse a knife on Chol HaMoed. Actually, on 15th, it's Chag, actually. We're certainly not going to immerse a knife on a festival. Say Kshura Sakim, if it's found tied to a knife. Now here we have trouble with the Rambam's interpretation. This sounds like a cleaver. If it's found tied to a knife, Harezoka Sakin, we assume its status is the same as the knife. In other words, that we assume its status is the same as a knife. In other words, if the knife is found on the 14th, we can slaughter with it immediately. And if a cleaver is found on the 14th tied to a knife, then we assume they're both tavurim. We assume they're both usable. The Rambam adds, by the way, and I brought the Rambam on the source sheet. We don't need to go through it in detail, but he adds that we're not just going to immerse these utensils. According to the Rambam, we are actually going to sprinkle the sprinkling water on them, the water of the red heifer. So really, we don't have any idea what this knife has been in contact with. Perhaps it's been in contact with a human corpse. In other words, a primary source of tumah, and just to make certain, we're going to sprinkle it with the water from the red heifer, with the water of the ashes of the red heifer, before we use it, because the Rambam says it's possible that the owner got it out to purify it and then lost it, and we somehow picked up this knife. So the Rambam goes right away to the most extreme form of purification. Parochet. What about a curtain? And again, we can see here we're creeping into the center of the temple. Parochet shenit mate bivlad hatuma. What if a curtain was defiled by some second order uncleanness? So a primary uncleanness is, for example, a person that's been in contact with a dead body. That's a primary uncleanness. But if that person touched some food, some liquid food maybe, and then that food touched something else, the something else has been defiled by something of secondary uncleanness. And that is purely rabbinic. And the Mishnah explains, Makbilin ota bifnim, machnisim ota miyad. Second order uncleanness, we immerse it within. That means within the temple. So we don't have to take it out of the temple. It's not like a sheretz that we have to take out of the temple on a priest's girdle. Remember, we talked about different ways to get a sheretz out of the temple if we found one in the temple. We don't have to get it out of the temple. We immerse it inside the temple and we put it straight back on. But the et shenit mate for av hatuma, if it was defiled by a primary uncleanness, at this point we need to do something. So we immerse it outside. We spread it out on the chel. The chel is some kind of boundary between the women's and the men's section. And it's somewhere you can just spread it out to see. So it needs the sundown to go down. It needs the sun to go down before we can put it back. So we spread it out on the chayil. Everybody can, well, a lot of people can see it. We'll see in a minute how many people can see it. A lot of people can see it, and we're going to leave it there until sundown. If it was new, if it was completely new, we spread it out on the roof of the colonnade. So we really want to show off what a beautiful curtain this is, and we spread it out on the roof of the colonnade so everybody can see the beauty of this textile work that's inside the Beit Mikdash, which I guess normally they wouldn't see. Well, they might or they might not see. So, and you might ask, well, what are these curtains? Parochet shenit made. What are these curtains that might be defiled by a second order uncleanness? So there's a description in Yoma in the name of Rav. Rabbi Zera brings in the name of Rav. Apparently there were 13 curtains in the temple. So this is probably one of the 13 curtains. And some of these are exterior, by the way. So if they were exterior, you can see how they might have been come into contact with something that was impure. So what are these 13 curtains? Shiva keneged shiva sharim. So there were 7 curtains for each of the 7 gates. We talked before about the 7 gates. And then there were another 2, shtaim, achat liftoach shel hechal ve'achat liftoach shel ulam. There was 2 more, one at the entrance to the sanctuary and one at the entrance to the entrance hall. And then another 2, shtaim bidvir, 2 actually within the Holy of Holies. 2 actually within the Holy of Holies. Ushtaim kenegdan ba'aliyah, and 2 corresponding to them in the upper chamber. So above the Holy of Holies, there was an upper chamber. There was a chamber right above it that kind of corresponded to it. And there were 2 curtains hanging high up above the Holy of the Holies, corresponding to the 2 that were just outside the Holy of Holies. So we see as we finish the Mishnah of Shekalim, we're creeping closer and closer to the center of the temple. We began by saying, gosh, this is a bit like an administration manual for the temple, but it's very, very widespread and diverse. Everybody contributes. The rich don't contribute more, and the poor don't contribute less. So we begin with the whole of Israel, actually, with the Mishnah of Shekalim, but we are going to finish the Masechet right in the Holy of Holies, and we'll carry on getting closer and closer to the temple as we pick up the last few Mishnayot tomorrow.